What is a civilization? Is it a language, a religion, a border on a map? For most of history, empires rise, they shine, and then they crumble into dust, leaving behind only broken statues and forgotten names. But once in a very long while, a people emerge who seem to defy this law of nature, a people who get conquered, scattered, and humiliated only to rise again, rebuild, and come back stronger than before. The Persians are such a people. For over 2,500 years, the land we now call Iran has stood at the crossroads of the world. It has been invaded by Greeks, Arabs, Mongols, and Turks. It has seen its cities burned, its libraries destroyed, and its faith outlawed. And yet time and again Persia re-emerged, not just as a political power, but as an idea, a unique culture, a distinct way of seeing the world that refused to disappear. This is not just a story of kings and battles, it is a story of how a mountain people developed one of the first human rights declarations. It is a story of underground aqueducts that turned desert into garden. It is a story of women who rode to war on horseback while their Greek sisters were confined to the home. It is the story of a religion that may have given the West its ideas of heaven, hell, and the final judgment. From the ancient Elamites to the Islamic Revolution, from Cyrus the Great to the Ayatollahs, this documentary will trace the full arc of Persian history. We will ask, what made this civilization so uniquely durable, and how did a nation, repeatedly crushed by the greatest conquerors in history, always manage to rise from the ashes? The story of Persia begins not in the grand palaces of Persepolis, but in the rugged, unforgiving peaks of the Zagros Mountains. Long before there was a Persia, there was Elam. Modern-day Iran has been inhabited since the earliest days of prehistory. Archaeological sites like Choga Golan and Choga Bonut, dating back to 7,200 BC, show some of the world's first agricultural villages. Here, wild barley, lentils, and legumes were cultivated. And in a discovery that hints at the region's long love affair with luxury, archaeologists found a 7,000-year-old jar of wine, now on display at the University of Pennsylvania, proving that the people of this land have been celebrating for a very long time. But the real foundation of Persian identity was laid by the Elamites. Their capital, Susa, was founded around 4,395 BC, possibly as an extension of the great Sumerian city of Uruk. Susa would go on to become one of the longest inhabited cities in history, surviving for an astonishing 5,500 years until the Mongol invasions finally snuffed it out. Who were the Elamites? They were not a single nation-state in the modern sense. Elam was the name given by their Mesopotamian neighbors to a loose coalition of tribes living in the high country. They likely called themselves Haltami, meaning those of the high country. And that geography, the high country versus the lowland plains of Mesopotamia, would define Persian identity for millennia. The Zagros Mountains were not suitable for the massive irrigation projects that fed the great cities of Babylon and Assyria. Instead, life in Elam revolved around semi-nomadic pastoralism, with small pockets of farming in the valleys. This made the Elamites less numerous than their lowland rivals, but it also made them tougher, harder, and more resilient. They were the mountain wolves circling the flocks of the plains. In many ways, the brutal Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s was simply the latest chapter in a 6,000-year-old conflict between the people of the mountains, Iran, and the people of the rivers, Iraq. One of the great frustrations of Elamite history is that we cannot yet fully read their writing. The Elamite language, which emerged around 3,200 BC, appears to be a linguistic isolate, related to no other known language, living or dead. However, recent breakthroughs in decipherment are beginning to crack the code, and soon we may learn much more about their daily lives. What we can see from their art is that the Elamites had a unique spiritual focus. Unlike the Egyptians or Sumerians, who favored images of gods in human form or hybrid human-animal creatures, Elamite art placed a strong emphasis on actual animals, especially dogs and bulls. Their religion was polytheistic, with a strong nature worship component centered on a mother goddess. Rituals were performed in sacred groves or on mountaintops. This was also a remarkably tolerant faith. The Elamites readily adopted the gods of their neighbors, adding them to their own growing pantheon. This tradition of religious tolerance would later become a hallmark of Persian rule, and some specific Elamite practices, like the use of elevated places for worship and the personification of natural forces, would flow directly into Zoroastrianism, the great faith of the later Persian empires. Perhaps most surprising to a modern audience is the status of women in Elamite society. In Elamite art, queens are depicted as equals to kings. Women are shown hunting, participating in ceremonies, and holding positions of authority. This respect for women was a deep cultural trait, one that would persist through later Persian civilizations, where women enjoyed property rights, freedom of movement, and even the ability to ride into battle, privileges unheard of in classical Greece or Rome. For much of its early history, Elam was the weaker power, frequently invaded by its more populous neighbors from the plains. In fact, Elam is the loser in the first recorded war in human history, a Sumerian invasion and looting around 2700 BC. Susa fell under the control of the legendary Sargon of Akkad, but the mountain people were patient. By 1100 BC, the tide had turned. King Shutruk Nakhunte of Elam launched a devastating series of conquests, rolling over the cities of Babylon. For a brief moment, Elam was the superpower of the ancient Near East. But the pattern that would define Persia for millennia had already set in. A ruler expands the empire, his successors fight among themselves, and the empire contracts. King Nebuchadnezzar I of Babylon conquered Elam in 1120 BC, proving that no victory in this region was ever permanent. Despite these wars, Elam was a major hub of international trade. Archaeologists have found artifacts from the Indus Valley civilization in modern-day Pakistan at Susa, as well as goods from Afghanistan and Central Asia. Afghanistan was a critical source of tin, essential for making bronze, the most advanced metal of the age. Elam was likely a middleman, selling eastern tin to Mesopotamia and even Egypt. These trade routes were the precursors to the Silk Road, with Persia already serving as the vital bridge between East and West. But a new people were on the move. Starting around 2000 BC, waves of nomadic Iranian peoples, Aryans, began migrating into the region from the Eurasian steppe. They lived a life similar to the later Scythians, Turks and Mongols, herding animals on horseback. Over more than a millennium, these Iranian tribes mixed with the native Elamites. The Elamite language continued to be used for administration, suggesting that even as the Iranians took political control, the existing bureaucracy remained in place, run by educated Elamites. One of the most important Iranian groups were the Medes. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, the same source who gave us the highly embellished tale of the 300 Spartans, the Medes began to federate the region under their first emperor, Deioces, who ruled from 727 to 675 BC. Whether Deioces was a real figure or a myth is debated, but what is clear is that the Median unification was largely a reaction to the brutal expansion of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians were the terror of the ancient world, known for mass deportations, impalings, and systematic cruelty. The Medes, allied with the Babylonians, finally destroyed the Assyrian capital of Nineveh in 612 BC. It was a moment of liberation for the entire region. By 700 BC, the area was predominantly Iranian in population, with three main groups: the Medes, the Persians, and the Parthians. The Medes had built the first Iranian empire, but it would be the Persians who would take it to the world. The man who changed everything was Cyrus II, known to history as Cyrus the Great. He was a Persian vassal king under the Medes, but in 553 BC he rebelled. Within a decade, he had not only overthrown his Median overlords, but had also conquered the mighty empire of Babylon. By 533 BC, his armies had pushed into western India. How did he do it? The sources are clouded by legend. Herodotus tells a strange story. A Median general named Harpagus was sent to punish Cyrus, but instead Harpagus defected and teamed up with him. What did Cyrus promise him? We will never know. But Harpagus became one of Cyrus's top generals, and the rest is history. Cyrus earned his title the Great for 4 key reasons. First, he was a master of imperial administration. He divided his vast empire into provinces called satrapies, each ruled by a governor, a satrap. These satraps had significant autonomy, but they were watched closely by the king's eyes, a network of spies who reported directly to Cyrus. The empire had 4 capitals, reflecting a respect for regional diversity, but the administrative heart remained at Susa, the old Elamite center. Cyrus also built a remarkable postal system, with relay stations every 2 days' travel, where couriers could find fresh horses, food and lodging. This system was so efficient that it was copied by later empires, including the Romans, and remained in use for over 1,000 years, until the Arab conquests. Second, Cyrus is a monumental figure in Jewish history. When he conquered Babylon in 539 BC, he found the Jewish people living there in exile, having been enslaved decades earlier by Nebuchadnezzar. Cyrus allowed them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. The Hebrew Bible celebrates him as a Messiah, the only non-Jewish person ever to be given that title. God himself, the Bible says, appointed Cyrus to this task. Third, Cyrus was famously tolerant of the cultures and religions of the peoples he conquered. He presented himself not as a foreign tyrant, but as the legitimate successor to local rulers. The Babylonians called him a liberator. He respected local temples, customs, and even local elites. This was a radical departure from the brutal methods of the Assyrians and many other conquerors. Fourth, Cyrus created an elite military unit that would become legendary, the Immortals. This force of exactly 10,000 men was always kept at full strength. If a soldier was killed or wounded, he was immediately replaced, giving the impression that the unit could not be harmed. The Immortals would remain the core of the Persian army for centuries. Cyrus's legacy extends far beyond the ancient world. His biography, the Cyropedia by the Greek writer Xenophon, was read by Thomas Jefferson and the other American founders. Jefferson credited it as one of the inspirations for the Declaration of Independence. The idea of a ruler who governs by consent, who respects the rights of the governed, who sees his role as a servant of justice, these ideas, filtered through Greek and Roman thought, trace back to the example of Cyrus. His tomb still stands in Iran, a simple but powerful monument in a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and his greatest city, Persepolis, remains one of the most spectacular archaeological sites on Earth. Cyrus's son, Cambyses, added Egypt to the empire in 525 BC, but the next truly great Achaemenid ruler was Darius I, who came to power in 522 BC. Darius extended the empire's reach to the Indus Valley in the east and into Europe in the west, crossing the Danube to fight the Scythians. But he is best remembered for his failed invasion of Greece. In 492 BC, Darius launched the first Persian invasion of Greece. It was a minor campaign by Persian standards, more a punitive expedition than a full-scale conquest. Bad luck struck immediately. A storm sank the Persian fleet. The reduced force that made it to Greece was defeated by the Athenians at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC. Angered by this humiliation, Darius planned a massive second invasion, but he died in 486 BC before he could execute it. His son, Xerxes, took up the task. Xerxes assembled a huge army, perhaps the largest ever seen in the ancient world, and marched into Greece. He burned and evacuated Athens in 480 BC, but the Persian fleet was destroyed at the Battle of Salamis. Fearing he would be trapped in Europe, Xerxes retreated. The remaining Persian forces in Greece were defeated at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC. Xerxes himself was assassinated in 465 BC by the commander of his own bodyguard. The Greco-Persian wars dragged on for another century, with neither side able to achieve a decisive victory, but Persia remained the dominant power in the Near East. And despite the military setbacks, the Achaemenid period was an age of remarkable achievement. One of the most extraordinary examples is the Shushtar hydraulic system, built under Darius. In a region that receives as little as 124 millimeters of rain per year, Darius's engineers created a complex of canals, dams and watermills that diverted a river to power industry and irrigate nearly 100,000 acres of farmland. It still partially functions today, a testament to Persian engineering. Even more ingenious were the qanats. These were underground canals that tapped into groundwater sources and carried water for miles to agricultural areas. By running underground, qanats prevented evaporation, which would be enormous in the hot Persian sun. They were also immune to destruction by floods or enemy armies. Building a qanat was an incredibly difficult task. The tunnel had to slope downward at a precise shallow angle to keep water flowing without eroding the channel. The distinctive vertical shafts you can still see dotting the Iranian landscape were dug at regular intervals to allow workers to remove debris and to provide ventilation. The qanat system was so effective that it spread across the Islamic world and as far west as Spain. Other Persian innovations include the yakchal, a giant domed clay structure that functioned as an ancient refrigerator. Ice was collected in winter and stored inside, kept frozen by the structure's insulation and by wind-catching towers that funneled cool air downward. The Persians also likely invented the chartar, the ancestor of the modern guitar. Backgammon, the oldest surviving board game, is another Persian creation, though India disputes the invention of chess. Daily life in the Achaemenid Empire was remarkably cosmopolitan. Slavery existed, but it was a minor part of the economy, far less central than in Greece or Rome. Most labor was performed by free workers, including a class of highly skilled craftsmen and engineers. Women enjoyed freedoms that would shock their Greek contemporaries. Persian women could own land, run businesses, and travel without a male guardian. Upper-class women rode horses and practiced archery, activities that would have been considered scandalous for a Greek woman. The only position from which they were generally excluded was the throne itself, though powerful queens and regents frequently exercised influence behind the scenes. And then there is Zoroastrianism. This ancient faith, founded by the prophet Zoroaster or Zarathustra, may be the world's first monotheistic religion. Its exact origins are lost in time. Zoroaster could have lived anywhere from the 10th to the 6th century BC, but his teachings were revolutionary. He taught that the universe is the stage for a cosmic battle between a supreme god of good, Ahura Mazda, and a supreme god of evil, Angra Mainyu. Human beings have free will and must choose which side to support. After death, they face a final judgment and are sent to heaven or hell. The world will eventually end in a final battle, followed by the resurrection of the dead and the purification of the universe. Sound familiar? Scholars of religion widely agree that Zoroastrianism had a profound influence on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The concepts of angels, demons, a final judgment, heaven, hell, and a messianic savior all appear first in Zoroastrian texts. The three wise men who visited the infant Jesus were, according to the Bible, magi, a term that specifically refers to Zoroastrian priests. The Zoroastrian concept of Asher, truth, righteousness, and the natural order strongly influenced the legal and moral codes of the Persian emperors. While the Achaemenids did not impose Zoroastrianism on their subjects, it was the faith of the royal court, and its emphasis on justice and order shaped the way the empire was run. In summary, the Achaemenid Empire was a remarkable experiment in multicultural governance. It was autocratic, but it was also efficient, tolerant, and remarkably just for its time. It built roads, postal systems, and irrigation networks. It respected local gods and customs. It gave women rights. It developed a sophisticated moral philosophy. And then, in the span of a single decade, it all came crashing down. The man who destroyed the Persian Empire was also its greatest admirer. Alexander of Macedon had read Xenophon's Cyropedia as a boy, and he modelled himself on Cyrus the Great. He was tutored by Aristotle, commanded armies at 16, and became king of Macedon at 20 after his father Philip was assassinated. Alexander moved quickly to crush any opposition, famously destroying the ancient city of Thebes and selling its people into slavery as a warning to the rest of Greece. In 334 BC, he crossed into Asia with an army of about 50,000 men. The Persian Empire, still the world's largest, seemed unbeatable, but Alexander had two secret weapons: his own military genius and the profound cowardice of the Persian emperor Darius III. The first major battle was at Issus in 333 BC. Darius III had a much larger army, but he made a critical mistake. He chose a battlefield that was a narrow strip of land between the mountains and the sea, preventing him from using his numerical advantage. Alexander led a direct cavalry charge at the Persian center, and then, incredibly, Darius III fled. He did not wait to see how the battle would unfold. He simply turned his chariot and ran. The sight of their emperor fleeing in terror caused the Persian army to collapse. Darius left behind his wife, his two daughters, his mother, and even his royal regalia, his bow, his chariot, his royal mantle. They became Alexander's prisoners. Alexander treated them with great respect, but he refused to return them, keeping them as hostages to legitimize his claim to the Persian throne. He would later marry one of Darius's daughters. 2 years later, at Gaugamela in 331 BC, it happened again. Darius had learned nothing. He chose a flat, open battlefield this time, perfect for his chariots and cavalry. He had a larger army. He had competent commanders. And once again, when Alexander charged, Darius turned and ran, this time even earlier, before any clear outcome was decided. His army, seeing their emperor flee, dissolved. After Gaugamela, the Persian Empire was doomed. City after city surrendered to Alexander. Those that resisted, like Tyre and Gaza, were utterly destroyed. Their men killed, their women and children sold into slavery. Alexander's combination of brutal punishment for resistance and generous terms for surrender was lethally effective. Darius III tried to raise a third army, but after 2 humiliating defeats, no one wanted to fight for him. He was soon murdered by one of his own satraps. Alexander marched into Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenids, and allowed his army to loot and burn it. Whether the fire that destroyed the palace complex was deliberate revenge for Xerxes' burning of Athens or an accident from a drunken party is still debated. Alexander later regretted it, but the damage was done. The relationship between the Greeks and Persians was always complex, a mixture of bitter rivalry and grudging mutual respect. Plutarch tells us that Alexander once stood before a fallen statue of Xerxes and addressed it. "Shall I pass by and leave you lying there because of the expedition you led against Greece, or shall I set you up again because of your magnanimity and your virtues in other respects. Alexander spent years chasing down Persian resistance in Central Asia, then pushed into India. But his men, exhausted and homesick, mutinied. Alexander was forced to turn back. He died suddenly in Babylon in 323 BC, probably of a fever, though poisoning has always been suspected. The man who had conquered the world was brought down by a mosquito. His empire was immediately torn apart by his generals. The largest fragment, the Seleucid Empire, controlled Persia. But the Seleucids were Greeks ruling a Persian land. They built Greek cities, encouraged Greek immigration, and tried to impose Greek culture. For the Persian peasant, however, life changed little. The tax collector might now speak Greek, but the crops were the same. The real change was at the top. A new Greco-Persian elite emerged, blending Macedonian military tactics with Persian administrative methods. The Hellenistic period lasted about 3 centuries. It saw the rise of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom in Central Asia, a fascinating hybrid culture that mixed Greek art with Buddhist philosophy, creating the distinctive style known as Greco-Buddhism. It was from this region that Buddhism spread into China along the Silk Road, but Greek rule was never universally accepted. In Iran, the memory of the Achaemenids never died, and as the Seleucid Empire weakened, new powers rose to take its place. The Parthians were, once again, a nomadic Iranian people from the steppes of Central Asia, in modern-day Turkmenistan. They had been ruled by the Seleucids through Greek governors, but they rebelled and established their own empire. Under Mithridates I the Great reigned 171 to 132 BC, the Parthians expanded east to control the Indus Valley and west to the borders of Roman territory. The Parthian Empire was a synthesis of Greek and Iranian culture. This was not a rejection of Hellenism, but an absorption of it. The Parthian ruling class spoke Greek as well as their native Parthian language. They issued coins with Greek inscriptions, but they also revived Iranian traditions, including a version of Zoroastrianism. One of the most interesting features of Parthian rule was its political system. It was much less autocratic than the Achaemenids. The Parthian Empire was a confederation of powerful noble families, and the king ruled with their consent. The nobility could depose an unfit king by a vote, without plunging the empire into civil war. This gave Parthia a remarkable level of political stability. While the Roman Republic was tearing itself apart with civil wars, Parthia enjoyed centuries of relative internal peace. The Parthians were also masters of cavalry warfare. Their heavily armoured cataphracts, the medieval knight's ancestor, and their swift horse archers were a nightmare for Roman legions. The Parthians perfected the Parthian shot, a feigned retreat followed by a backward arrow loosed at the pursuing enemy. The phrase is still used today to describe a parting insult. In 53 BC, the Roman general Crassus, the richest man in Rome and a member of the first triumvirate with Caesar and Pompey, invaded Parthia. He was lured into the desert, his legions surrounded, and Crassus was captured. In a famous story, likely apocryphal but deeply satisfying, the Parthians executed him by pouring molten gold down his throat to punish his legendary greed. His severed head was used as a prop in a Greek play performed at the Parthian court. The Parthians blocked Roman expansion into the east for nearly 300 years. They were the great rival of Rome, a rival that Rome could never defeat. But by the early 3rd century AD, the Parthian nobility had grown too powerful, and internal dynastic conflicts weakened the empire. The Sasanian Empire rose from the ashes of Parthia in 224 AD. The Sasanians claimed direct descent from the Achaemenids, and they made this ideological connection explicit. They revived Zoroastrianism as a state religion, building fire temples across the empire. They centralized power, breaking the power of the great noble families. They also created a more bureaucratic, more urbanized civilization than their Parthian predecessors. The Sasanians were the only power that the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire ever truly feared. For 4 centuries, the two superpowers fought a grinding back-and-forth war for control of the Middle East. The Sasanians pushed deep into Byzantine territory, even capturing Jerusalem in 614 AD and taking the True Cross as a trophy. The Byzantines, under Emperor Heraclius, eventually counterattacked, reaching the gates of Ctesiphon, the Sasanian capital. But both empires exhausted themselves in these wars, leaving them vulnerable to a new force that was about to explode out of the Arabian desert. During the Sasanian period, Persian culture reached new heights. This was the age of the Quadi-Namag, the Book of Kings, a collection of Iranian myths and legends that would later form the basis of Ferdowsi's epic Shahnameh. Sasanian art, architecture, and engineering were so influential that later Islamic rulers would often be mistaken by Europeans as Persian because they copied Sasanian styles. The great domed mosques of Isfahan trace their lineage directly to Sasanian palace architecture. The Sasanians also developed a sophisticated philosophical tradition, including a form of Zoroastrianism that emphasized rational inquiry. They established hospitals, universities, and a system of roads that rivaled the Romans. They traded extensively with China, sending embassies to the Tang court, and they controlled the Indian Ocean trade routes, pushing the Byzantines out. One of the most mysterious artifacts from this period is the Baghdad Battery, a clay jar with a copper cylinder and an iron rod that, when filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar, produces a small electric current. Archaeologists are not sure what it was used for. Some suggest electroplating, others medical stimulation. Whatever its purpose, it demonstrates a level of experimental science that was far ahead of its time. But the Sasanians also faced a new threat: the Arabs. In 627 AD, the Sasanian Emperor Khusro II was overthrown and killed, plunging the empire into a 4-year civil war. 10 different claimants fought for the throne. By the time the civil war ended in 632 AD, the Sasanian army was exhausted, the treasury was empty, and the empire's border defenses were in shambles. That same year, the Prophet Muhammad died. His successors, the Rashidun Caliphs, united the Arab tribes and launched a series of lightning conquests. In 636 AD, at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, the Arabs crushed the Sasanian army. The last Sasanian emperor, Yazdegerd III, fled east. He was murdered in 651 AD by a miller in Merv, in modern-day Turkmenistan. The Sasanian Empire was no more. The Arab conquest of Persia was a cataclysm. Zoroastrian temples were burned or converted into mosques. Priests were killed or fled. The Arabic language replaced Middle Persian as the language of government, learning, and eventually daily life. Non-Muslims were forced to pay a special tax, the jizya, and were subjected to legal and social discrimination. But Persia did not simply disappear into the Arab world. Instead, a remarkable process began. The Persians converted their conquerors. The Abbasid Revolution of 750 AD, which overthrew the Umayyad Caliphate, was led by an Iranian general named Abu Muslim. The Abbasids moved their capital from Damascus to Baghdad, which was built on the banks of the Tigris, deep in the heart of the old Persian Empire. The Abbasid court adopted Persian court rituals, Persian administrative techniques, and Persian ideas of kingship. The result was the Islamic Golden Age. Under the Abbasids, Baghdad became the greatest center of learning in the world. The House of Wisdom employed Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, and Muslim scholars who translated and preserved the great works of Greek, Persian, and Indian philosophy, medicine, and science. It was here that algebra was invented. The word comes from the Arabic al-Jabr. Here, scholars developed the scientific method, advanced optics, mapped the stars, and wrote the first medical encyclopedias. Persians were at the heart of this intellectual explosion. Thinkers like al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra, Al-Farabi, the second teacher after Aristotle, and Avicenna, whose canon of medicine was used in European universities for 500 years, were all Persian or worked in the Persian cultural sphere. But political unity did not last. By the 10th century, the Abbasid Caliphate was fragmenting into regional powers. Persian dynasties like the Samanids, the Buyids, and the Saffarids ruled large parts of Iran, paying only nominal allegiance to the caliph in Baghdad. It was under the Samanids that Persian literature revived. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, Book of Kings, completed in 1010 AD, is a 50,000-verse epic that tells the mythical and historical story of Persia from the beginning of time to the Arab conquest. Ferdowsi deliberately used very few Arabic loanwords, writing in a pure Persian that helped preserve the language. Then came the Turks. The Seljuk Turks, another nomadic people from the steppes, conquered Persia in the 11th century. They adopted Persian culture, Persian administration, and Persian Islam. Under the Seljuks, the great Persian poet Omar Khayyam wrote his famous Rubaiyat, and the brilliant theologian Al-Ghazali reformed Islamic philosophy. The Seljuk period was a time of stability and prosperity, but nothing could prepare the world for what came next. The Mongols, under Genghis Khan, invaded Persia in 1219 AD. The destruction was unlike anything the region had ever seen. The Mongols did not just conquer cities, they systematically destroyed them. They slaughtered entire populations, men, women, children, even cats and dogs. They burned libraries, mosques, and irrigation systems. The death toll is estimated in the millions. Baghdad, the intellectual capital of the world, was sacked in 1258 AD. The Tigris ran black with the ink of the books thrown into the river. The destruction of the Qanat system was especially catastrophic. Without these underground canals, much of the agricultural land could not be farmed. Urban centers collapsed. The population of Persia would not recover its pre-Mongol level for centuries. The Mongol Ilkhanate eventually converted to Islam and began to rebuild. But then, just as recovery was beginning, disaster struck again. The Black Death reached Iran in 1349, killing perhaps 30% of the population. And then, in 1381, Timur, Tamerlane, arrived. Timur was the last great nomadic conqueror and one of the most brutal figures in history. He modeled himself on Genghis Khan and sought to surpass him. His campaigns of conquest killed an estimated 17 million people, 5% of the world's population at the time. He built towers of skulls. He destroyed cities so completely that their locations were forgotten. Many contemporaries believed he was the apocalypse personified, the horseman of war. And yet, paradoxically, Timur was also a great patron of art and architecture. He filled his capital, Samarkand, with magnificent mosques and palaces. He brought artists and craftsmen from all over his empire to work for him. The Timurid style of architecture, with its massive turquoise domes and intricate geometric patterns, became the model for the later Islamic empires. But Timur's empire, like all empires built on conquest, collapsed soon after his death. Persia entered another century of chaos, ruled by competing nomadic confederations, the Black Sheep Turkmen, Kara Koyunlu, and then the White Sheep Turkmen, Ak Koyunlu. Out of this chaos emerged a dynasty that would define modern Iran, the Safavids. Their founder, Shah Ismail I, was a teenager when he began his conquests in 1501. He was a religious leader as well as a military one, the head of a Sufi order that venerated the family of the Prophet Muhammad. Ismail's followers were mostly Turkoman tribesmen, known as the Kizilbash, redheads, for their distinctive red headgear. Ismail conquered Iran, the Caucasus, and most of modern-day Afghanistan and Turkmenistan within a decade. And he did something unprecedented. He declared that the official religion of his empire would be Twelver Shia Islam. This was not a popular decision. At the time, most Iranians were Sunni, But Ismail forced the conversion, killing those who resisted. The Safavid policy of imposing Shi'ism created the religious character of modern Iran and permanently divided Iran from its Sunni neighbors, especially the Ottoman Empire. The Safavids and Ottomans were mortal enemies. They fought for control of Mesopotamia, the Caucasus, and eastern Anatolia for more than 2 centuries. The Safavids were Shia, the Ottomans Sunni. The Safavids spoke Persian, or Turkic languages, the Ottomans Turkish. The Safavids allied with European powers, including the Habsburgs and the Venetians, against the Ottomans. The rivalry shaped the entire region. The greatest Safavid ruler was Shah Abbas I, reigned 1588 to 1629. He modernized the army, creating a standing force of musketeers and artillerymen, hence the term Gunpowder Empire. He also built a new capital at Isfahan, which became one of the most beautiful cities in the world. The Naqsh-e-Jahan Square in Isfahan is still one of the largest city squares on Earth, surrounded by magnificent mosques, palaces, and bazaars. Shah Abbas also had a surprising ally, England. He allowed the British East India Company to establish trading posts in Iran, and with the help of the British Royal Navy, he expelled the Portuguese from the island of Hormuz, which controlled the entrance to the Persian Gulf. English adventurers like the Shirley brothers helped train the Safavid army. The Safavid period was a golden age of Persian art. Persian carpet weaving reached its peak. Miniature painting flourished. Architecture became more elegant and refined. The famous bridges of Isfahan, the Coc Pol, Bridge of 33 Arches, and the Kaju Bridge were built as much for beauty as for function, serving as places for public promenades and tea houses. But the Safavids also had weaknesses. The empire was over-centralized, and later Shahs were often weak, more interested in wine and women than in ruling. The Kizilbash tribal leaders became increasingly powerful and rebellious. By the early 18th century, the Safavid Empire was in decline. In 1722, an Afghan army marched on Isfahan, defeated the Safavid forces, and besieged the capital. After a terrible famine, the city fell. The Safavid dynasty collapsed. It seemed that Persia might vanish as an independent state, but once again, a military genius rose from the chaos. Nader Shah, a warlord from the Afshar tribe, reunited Iran, drove out the Afghans, and even reconquered territory lost to the Ottomans and Russians. Then, in 1739, he invaded India. At the Battle of Karnal, he crushed the Mughal Empire. He sacked Delhi, looting a treasure so vast that he was able to exempt Iran from taxes for 3 years. The loot included the legendary Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor diamond, but Nader Shah became paranoid and cruel. He was assassinated in 1747, and his empire collapsed. Another period of civil war followed, until the Qajar dynasty finally reunified Iran in 1796. The Qajars were a Turkoman tribe, but they ruled a Persian state. Their story is one of slow, humiliating decline. The Industrial Revolution had made Europe vastly more powerful than the rest of the world. Russia and Britain began to exert enormous pressure on Iran. Russia, under Peter the Great and his successors, was expanding southward. In 2 wars, 1804 to 1813 and 1826 to 1828, Russia defeated Iran and stripped it of all its territories in the Caucasus, modern-day Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Dagestan. For the first time in millennia, Iran lost its northern frontier. Many Muslims from the Caucasus chose to flee rather than live under Orthodox Christian rule, migrating to Iran. Britain, meanwhile, was expanding its Indian empire. The British feared that Russia would push through Iran to threaten India. Iran became the central battlefield of the Great Game, the clandestine struggle between the Russian and British empires for control of Central Asia. The Qajar Shahs played the 2 powers against each other, but they were ultimately pawns. By the late 19th century, Iran was effectively a semi-colony. The Shahs sold concessions to foreigners. The British controlled the tobacco trade. A British subject, Baron de Ruyter, was given control of almost all of Iran's industry, railways, and mining. Only a massive popular protest forced the Shah to cancel the concession. Then, in 1908, oil was discovered in Iran. Suddenly, Iran was the most strategically important country in the world. The British government took direct control of the oil industry, forming the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later BP. The oil revenues enriched the British government and the Shah's court, but did little for the ordinary Iranian. A constitutional revolution broke out in 1905, forcing the Shah to accept a parliament, Majlis. But the new constitution was weakened by British and Russian interference. In 1907, Britain and Russia signed a convention dividing Iran into two spheres of influence: the north for Russia, the south for Britain, with a neutral zone in the middle. Iran's independence existed only on paper. During World War I, Iran declared neutrality, but it was occupied by Russian, British, and Ottoman troops. Famine killed 2 million Iranians. After the war, the British tried to turn Iran into a protectorate. The plan failed, but the British continued to control the oil industry and the army. In 1921, an officer named Reza Khan led a coup. With British support, he made himself Shah in 1925, founding the Pahlavi dynasty. Reza Shah was a modernizer. He built a trans-Iranian railway, established a modern army, banned the veil for women, and built secular schools and universities. But he was also a brutal autocrat who crushed dissent, jailed political opponents, and censored the press. His sympathy for Nazi Germany during World War II led Britain and the Soviet Union to invade Iran in 1941. They forced Reza Shah to abdicate in favor of his young son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Iran became a vital supply route for American aid to the Soviet Union. The post-war period saw a surge of Iranian nationalism. In 1951, the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the British-controlled oil industry. Britain was furious. The CIA and MI6 organized a coup in 1953, overthrowing Mossadegh and restoring the Shah's absolute power. The Shah became a close ally of the United States, part of the twin pillars of the Middle East, along with Saudi Arabia. The Shah launched a program of rapid modernization and westernization, the White Revolution. He gave women the vote, broke up large estates, and poured oil money into industrial development. Iran became a military and economic powerhouse. But the Shah's regime was also deeply corrupt and brutally repressive. His secret police, Savak, tortured and killed thousands of political prisoners. The Shah's ostentatious 1971 celebration of 2,500 years of Persian monarchy cost hundreds of millions of dollars, shocking ordinary Iranians struggling to make ends meet. The Shah's secularism and westernization angered the powerful Shia clergy. The exiled cleric Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini preached revolution. In 1978, massive protests erupted. The army refused to fire on the crowds. In January 1979, the Shah fled. In February, Khomeini returned to Tehran. The Islamic Revolution had succeeded. The revolution created the Islamic Republic of Iran, a unique hybrid of theocracy and democracy. A supreme leader, first Khomeini, then Ali Khamenei, holds ultimate authority, while an elected president and parliament manage day-to-day affairs. The revolution also produced the Iran hostage crisis, when revolutionaries seized the American embassy and held 52 Americans for 444 days. This severed relations with the West and turned Iran into a pariah state. The new regime faced immediate threats. In 1980, Saddam Hussein of Iraq invaded, hoping to seize Iran's oil-rich Khuzestan province. The Iran-Iraq War lasted 8 years and became one of the bloodiest conflicts since World War II. Both sides used chemical weapons, child soldiers, and human wave attacks. Hundreds of thousands died. The war ended in a stalemate in 1988. Since then, Iran has pursued an independent path. It supports Shia militias and political parties across the Middle East, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Syrian government, and the Houthis in Yemen. It has developed a missile program and, the West fears, nuclear weapons. Sanctions have crippled the economy, but the regime has survived. Yet Iran is not just a revolutionary state, it is also the inheritor of one of the world's oldest and richest civilizations. Its people are deeply proud of their history. The poetry of Hafez and Rumi is still memorized by school children. The ruins of Persepolis still draw crowds. The Nowruz, Persian New Year, is still celebrated on the first day of spring, just as it was in Zoroastrian times. What can we learn from the long history of Persia? Perhaps the most important lesson is resilience. The Persians have been conquered by Greeks, Arabs, Mongols, Turks, and Afghans. Their religion has been replaced from Zoroastrianism to Islam. Their language has been transformed from Middle Persian to Modern Persian with a heavy Arabic influence, and their political system has been remade many times over. And yet, there is a continuity, a sense of being Persian that has survived for 3 millennia. This is the secret of Persia. It is not a race or a language or a religion. It is a civilization, a way of understanding the world, a set of shared stories and memories, a taste for poetry and gardens and justice. And as long as people tell the story of Cyrus the Great, as long as the Shahnameh is read, as long as the Persian New Year is celebrated, that civilization will never truly die. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe. Since you stayed this long, perhaps you would like to check my other videos. Recent video is about the history of Norway. Until next time.